It was a cold winter evening when Marcus Thompson finished his long shift at City Hospital. The clock showed 11:30 p.m. as he walked to his old Honda Civic in the parking lot. Marcus worked as a cleaner at the hospital, and today had been extra tiring because 3 of his coworkers were sick with the flu. The streets were quiet as Marcus drove home. He was thinking about the hot soup his wife had promised to keep warm for him. After working for 12 hours straight, all he wanted was to eat something and go to sleep. The radio played soft music, and Marcus hummed along, trying to stay alert on the empty road. As he turned onto Highway 27, his headlights caught something unusual. About 100 feet ahead, a car was stopped on the roadside with its hazard lights blinking. Next to the car, Marcus could see someone moving around. He slowed down his car to get a better look. Through the darkness, he saw it was a woman. She was wearing a blue coat and walking back and forth near her car, looking at her phone. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell she was worried. The woman kept looking at her car's back tire and then at her phone, like she was trying to get help. Marcus thought about what to do. His mother had always taught him to help people in need, but he also knew that sometimes people got scared when they saw a big black man approaching them at night. He had faced such situations before, but something about the woman's desperate movements made him decide to stop. He parked his car about 20 feet behind her car and turned on his hazard lights too. Before getting out, Marcus took out his hospital ID card and put it around his neck. He knew it might help the woman feel safer. He also turned on his phone's flashlight, holding it where it could light up his face. The woman noticed his car and quickly moved to the other side of her vehicle. Marcus could see fear in her eyes as he stepped out. She was a white woman, probably in her mid-30s, with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. Her face showed that she had been crying. "Excuse me, ma'am," Marcus called out in his softest voice. "I saw you might need some help. I work at City Hospital. See my ID card? Is everything okay?" The woman, whose name was Sarah Miller, looked at Marcus's ID card and then at his kind face. She seemed to relax a little bit, but Marcus could still see she was nervous. He stayed where he was, giving her space to feel comfortable. I hit something on the road," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "My back tire is flat, and I've been trying to call for help, but my phone signal is very weak here. I've been stuck for almost an hour." Marcus nodded understandingly. "That's not good at all. Would you like me to take a look at your tire? I've changed quite a few flat tires in my time." He smiled gently, trying to show he was just there to help. Sarah looked at her phone again, then at the dark highway where only a few cars had passed in the last hour. None had stopped to help. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Yes, please," she said. "That would be very kind of you." Marcus walked slowly to the back of her car, keeping his movements calm and visible. The rear right tire was completely flat. He bent down to examine it better with his flashlight. "It looks like you hit something sharp," he explained. "The good news is, if you have a spare tire, I can help you change it. Do you know where your spare is?" Sarah seemed more relaxed now. Marcus's professional way of handling the situation made her feel safer. She opened her trunk and pointed to where the spare tire was stored. As Marcus started to get the tools out, he thought about how nervous Sarah had been at first. He didn't blame her. Being alone on a dark highway was scary for anyone, but he was glad she had given him a chance to help. His mother would be proud. What Marcus didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to turn into something much more complicated. As he laid out the tools on the ground and prepared to jack up the car, neither he nor Sarah noticed the police car that was slowly approaching from the distance. Marcus was making good progress with changing the tire. He had positioned the jack under Sarah's car and was starting to lift it up. The night was getting colder, and his breath made small clouds in the air. Sarah stood nearby, holding her phone's flashlight to help him see better. "You seem to know what you're doing," Sarah said, watching as Marcus worked efficiently. She had stopped checking her phone every few seconds, and was now more interested in learning about the kind stranger who had stopped to help her. "My dad taught me how to change tires when I was young," Marcus explained as he turned the jack handle. "He always said everyone should know basic car repairs. It's helped me out many times." Just then, they both noticed bright lights approaching from behind. At first, Marcus thought it was just another car passing by, but the lights got brighter and brighter until they were almost blinding. Blue and red lights started flashing, and they heard the unmistakable sound of a police siren giving a short burst. Marcus's heart started beating faster. He had been in situations like this before, and they rarely ended well. He slowly stood up from his crouching position, keeping his hands visible. Sarah could see the change in his face. The friendly, helpful expression was replaced with one of worry and caution. Two police cars had pulled up behind them. The bright spotlights from the police cars lit up the whole scene like it was daytime. 4 officers stepped out, their hands near their weapons. "Step away from the vehicle and put your hands where we can see them," one officer shouted. His voice was harsh and commanding. Marcus did exactly as he was told. He moved away from Sarah's car slowly, his hands raised above his head. The tools he had been using to fix the tire lay scattered on the ground around him. "Officer, wait." Sarah tried to speak up, but another policeman cut her off. "Ma'am, please step away from him and come over, dear," the second officer called out. He was younger than the first one and seemed nervous, his hand resting on his gun. Sarah didn't move. Instead, she stood her ground and spoke louder. "No, you don't understand. This man is helping me. My tire was flat, and he stopped to change it for me. He works at City Hospital. Look, he's wearing his ID." The first officer, whose name Tag read Officer Peterson, moved closer to Marcus, who remained completely still with his hands up. "We received a call about a suspicious person harassing a woman on the highway," Peterson said, his flashlight beam moving between Marcus's face and his ID card. "That's ridiculous." Sarah's voice was angry now. She took out her phone and started recording. "The only harassment happening right now is from you officers. This man is a good Samaritan who stopped to help me when dozens of other cars just drove by." Marcus stayed quiet, but his mind was racing. He thought about his wife waiting at home with his soup. He thought about how many times he had helped people with car trouble before. He thought about his mother's words about helping others, and how right now, those good intentions had put him in danger. One of the female officers who had arrived in the second car stepped forward. She seemed to be assessing the situation more calmly than her colleagues. She noticed the properly positioned jack under the car, the spare tire ready to go, and the professional way everything was set up. "Sarah, is what you're saying true? Did this man stop to help you voluntarily?" the female officer asked, her tone more reasonable than her colleagues. "Yes," Sarah was almost shouting now, still recording everything on her phone. "His name is Marcus. He showed me his hospital ID, and he's been nothing but professional and kind. I can't believe someone called the police just because they saw a black man helping a white woman. This is absolutely shameful." The tension in the air was thick. Marcus still hadn't moved, his arms starting to ache from keeping them raised. The female officer turned to Officer Peterson and spoke quietly to him. Sarah kept recording, her hand shaking with anger. And somewhere in the distance, more cars passed by, their drivers unaware of the drama unfolding on the side of Highway 27. None of them knew that what happened next would change not just their lives, but their entire community's perspective on race, trust, and justice. The female officer, whose name tag read Officer Martinez, finally convinced her colleagues to lower their weapons. She had worked in this community for 15 years and had seen too many situations like this go wrong, but she could clearly see this was different. "Sir, you can lower your arms now," Officer Martinez said to Marcus, her voice gentle but professional. Marcus slowly brought his arms down, his shoulders aching from holding them up for so long. You could feel his heart still racing in his chest. Sarah was still recording everything on her phone. Her hands were shaking, but she made sure to capture every detail. The way the other officers had responded, the fear on Marcus's face, and now the slow change in the situation. She had never thought she would witness something like this firsthand. "Can someone please explain why we're treating this man like a criminal?" Sarah demanded. "He stopped to help me when no one else would. He showed me his ID, explained everything he was doing, and was nothing but respectful. And this is how he gets treated?" Officer Peterson looked uncomfortable. The call they had received described a suspicious black male approaching women's cars on the highway. Now, seeing the reality of the situation, the properly positioned jack, the spare tire ready to go, and Sarah's angry defense of Marcus, he knew they had overreacted. "Ma'am, we were responding to a concerned citizen's call," Peterson tried to explain, but Sarah cut him off. "A concerned citizen?" Sarah's voice was filled with disbelief. You mean someone drove by, saw a black man helping a white woman, and automatically assumed something bad was happening? And you all just rushed in with your hands on your guns without even assessing the situation? Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Officers, I understand you were doing your job, but I want to finish helping this lady change her tire. She's been stuck here long enough. Is that okay? Officer Martinez nodded. Of course, sir. Would you like any assistance? No, thank you, Marcus replied politely but firmly. I know what I'm doing. He turned back to Sarah's car and knelt down to continue his work, though his hands were still shaking slightly. The other officers started to back away, but Sarah wasn't done. She walked up to Officer Peterson, her phone still recording. I want your badge numbers. All of you. And I want to know exactly who made this call and what they said. This is racial profiling, plain and simple. While Sarah collected the officer's information, Marcus focused on finishing the tire change. Officer Martinez stayed nearby, not to watch him, but to ensure no one else interfered. She had seen the shame on her colleagues' faces and knew this incident would have consequences. As Marcus tightened the last lug nut on the spare tire, he thought about how differently this night could have gone. One wrong move, one nervous officer, one moment of panic, it could have been tragic. He thought about his wife at home, probably worried sick now because he was late. Sarah ended her recording and walked back to Marcus, who was now putting the tools back in her trunk. I am so sorry, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. This should never have happened. What you did was a simple act of kindness, and look how it was twisted. Marcus gave her a small smile. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time something like this has happened to me, but maybe, with your video, we can help make it one of the last times it happens to someone else. The police cars were still there, their lights now turned off. Officer Martinez approached one last time. Sir, I apologize for how this situation was handled. Ma'am, you can file a formal complaint at the station. We will fully cooperate with any investigation. As the officers finally left, Sarah and Marcus stood in the quiet of the night again, but something had changed. What started as a simple flat tire had become something much bigger. Sarah looked at her phone, at the video she had recorded, and knew she had to do something with it. This isn't over, she said firmly. People need to see this. They need to understand what happened here tonight. Marcus nodded, knowing that the next part of this story was just beginning. The next morning, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what had happened on the highway. After checking that Marcus had gotten home safely last night, she had spent hours watching the video she recorded over and over again. Around 9 a.m., she made a decision. With shaking hands, she opened her social media account and started typing. She wrote about everything. How her tire went flat, how scared she had been alone on the dark highway, and how Marcus had stopped to help her. She described his kindness, his professionalism, and then the terrible moment when the police arrived. Last night, I witnessed firsthand how racism turns a simple act of kindness into a dangerous situation, she wrote. She attached the video and pressed post before she could change her mind. Meanwhile, Marcus was having a difficult morning at work. His wife, Tamara, hadn't wanted him to go to work after what happened, but bills needed to be paid. As he cleaned the hospital floors, his phone kept buzzing in his pocket. His wife was sending him messages about Sarah's social media post. Marcus, the video is going viral, Tamara texted. People are sharing it everywhere. Local news stations are asking for interviews. By lunchtime, Sarah's post had been shared thousands of times. People were outraged by what they saw in the video. Comments poured in from all over the country. Many people shared similar stories of how their own good deeds had been misunderstood because of their skin color. The hospital's CEO, Dr. Roberts, called Marcus to his office. Marcus worried he might be in trouble, but instead, Dr. Roberts was supportive. Marcus, we've seen the video, Dr. Roberts said kindly. The hospital stands behind you completely. What you did shows exactly the kind of caring and helpful spirit we want in our employees. Around 2 p.m., local news vans started gathering outside the hospital. Reporters wanted to talk to Marcus. The story was spreading faster than anyone expected. People were calling it a perfect example of how racial bias affects everyday life. Sarah was also getting a lot of attention. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from news stations and newspapers. but she was most surprised by an email from the police department's internal affairs office. They wanted to investigate what had happened. "We take these incidents very seriously," the email said. "We would like to speak with both you and Mr. Thompson about your experience." That evening, Marcus finally agreed to do one interview, but only if Sarah could be there too. They met at the local news station. The interview room was bright with studio lights, and both of them felt nervous. "I just did what anyone should do," Marcus said during the interview. "When you see someone who needs help, you help them. That's what my parents taught me. But unfortunately, being black means even simple acts of kindness can be seen as suspicious." Sarah spoke strongly about what she had witnessed. "The police response was completely inappropriate," she said. "They turned a moment of kindness into something dangerous. We need to talk about why this happened and make sure it doesn't happen again." The reporter asked them what they hoped would come from sharing their story. "Change," Marcus said simply. "Real change. Not just people being angry for a few days and then forgetting about it. We need better police training, better community relationships, and most importantly, we need people to examine their own biases." After the interview, as they walked to their cars, Sarah turned to Marcus. "I hope you don't regret stopping to help me that night," she said quietly. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "You know what? I don't regret it at all. Yes, it was scary when those police cars showed up. But maybe this needed to happen. Maybe our story will help people understand what's wrong and what needs to change." As they drove away from the news station, neither Marcus nor Sarah knew that their story was about to reach even more people. The next day would bring even bigger surprises, and their simple roadside encounter would start conversations that would spread far beyond their small community. The video of their experience was just beginning to make waves, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities for both of them. The next day brought changes that neither Marcus nor Sarah had expected. When Marcus woke up, his wife Tamara showed him that their story had made national news. The video had reached millions of views overnight. His phone had so many messages that it kept freezing. "Look at this," Tamara said, showing him her tablet. "People are organizing a march this weekend. They're calling it Walking While Black to protest racial profiling. And you won't believe who shared our story. Some famous celebrities and civil rights leaders." At her home, Sarah was dealing with her own surprising situation. Her elementary school students' parents had seen the video, and many had written emails supporting her actions. But not everyone was happy. The school principal called her in for an early morning meeting. "Sarah, while we support your right to speak up about injustice," the principal said, looking uncomfortable, "some board members are concerned about the attention this is bringing to our school." Sarah sat up straighter in her chair. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not sorry for posting that video. Our students learn about civil rights in history class. Well, this is civil rights happening right now, in our own community." Meanwhile, the police department was facing serious pressure. Officer Martinez, the female officer who had helped calm the situation that night, was asked to speak at an emergency meeting with the police chief. She brought up problems she had seen in police training. "Chief, what happened that night is just one example," she explained. "We need better training on bias. We need to learn how to assess situations before rushing in with weapons drawn." The police chief listened carefully. He knew this incident had exposed problems that couldn't be ignored anymore. By afternoon, he called a press conference to announce changes in police training and new community outreach programs. Around lunchtime, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. It was one of the young officers from that night, Officer Kevin Chen. He wasn't in uniform, and he looked nervous. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Chen said, "I came to apologize personally. That night, I followed others' lead instead of thinking for myself. I should have done better." Marcus appreciated the young officer's honesty. They talked for almost an hour about police work, community trust, and how to do better. Neither knew that someone had taken a photo of their conversation, which would soon go viral with the caption, "This is how change begins, one honest conversation at a time." Sarah spent her afternoon responding to messages from other teachers across the country. Many shared stories about discussing racial bias with their students. She started planning a special lesson about community helpers and prejudice, something age-appropriate for her young students. By evening, local businesses had gotten involved. The owner of Jim's auto shop, where Sarah usually got her car fixed, announced free basic car repair classes for everyone in the community. If we all learn to help each other, he said in a radio interview, maybe we'll stop being so quick to judge others who do. Marcus and his wife attended a community meeting that night at their church. The room was full of people wanting to discuss what happened and how to prevent similar incidents. Black parents talked about teaching their children to be careful even when doing good deeds. White community members expressed shame and determination to do better. During the meeting, Marcus received an email that made him smile. It was from the hospital administration. They wanted to start a program where hospital staff would volunteer to help stranded motorists, inspired by what he had done. They were calling it Safe Stop, and they wanted him to help design the training. As the meeting ended, Sarah arrived with some news. A national morning show wanted to interview both of them. It would fly them to New York next week. The show wanted to discuss not just what happened that night, but also the positive changes happening in their community because of it. Who would have thought, Marcus said to Sarah, that a flat tire would lead to all this? Sarah smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. As they left the church that night, they saw a group of teenagers practicing what to do if they got a flat tire. One of the teens was Officer Chen's son, and he was teaching his friends everything his father had learned from talking with Marcus. The story wasn't over yet. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new challenges, and new opportunities for change. A week later, Marcus and Sarah found themselves in New York City, sitting in the bright lights of the Good Morning America studio. Neither had ever been on national television before. Marcus wore his best suit, and Sarah had chosen a professional blue dress. Just be natural, the show's producer told them before they went on air. Your story is powerful because it's real. The famous TV host welcomed them warmly. Today we have two people whose story has touched millions, she began. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into a moment that sparked nationwide conversations about racial bias. As they shared their story, the studio audience listened quietly. When they showed the video from that night, some people in the audience wiped away tears. Marcus described how it felt to have guns pointed at him while he was just trying to help someone. The scariest part, he explained, his voice steady but emotional, wasn't just that moment. It was knowing that this happens to other people like me all the time, and not everyone has someone there to record it and speak up. Sarah then spoke about why she decided to share the video. I couldn't just let it go, she said. As a teacher, I tell my students to stand up for what's right. I had to practice what I teach. During the commercial break, their phones lit up with messages. Marcus's wife sent a video of their church congregation watching the show together. Sarah's students had made a big banner saying, "Our teacher is a hero." But the biggest surprise came when the host announced their next guest, the police commissioner from their city. He had flown to New York to make an important announcement live on national television. After reviewing what happened that night, the commissioner said, "We're making major changes in our department. We're introducing new training programs, creating a citizen review board, and starting community outreach initiatives. We're calling it the Thompson-Miller Protocol, named after Marcus and Sarah." The audience applauded loudly. Marcus and Sarah looked at each other in surprise. They hadn't known about this announcement beforehand. After the show, more good news waited. A national civil rights organization wanted them to speak at schools and police departments across the country. They would share their story and help create better understanding between communities and law enforcement. During lunch at a fancy New York restaurant, paid for by the TV show, Sarah showed Marcus something on her phone. Teachers across the country were using their story to teach students about bias and courage. Someone had even written a children's book about what happened. "Look at this," Sarah said excitedly. Jim's auto shop idea has spread too. Auto repair shops in 50 different cities are now offering free classes. They're calling it the Highway Heroes program. Marcus smiled, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. A simple decision to help someone had turned into something much bigger than himself. That evening, as they waited at the airport for their flight home, they saw their story playing on the airport TV news. But this time, it wasn't just about what had happened that night. It was about all the positive changes happening because of it. "You know what makes me happiest?" Marcus said to Sarah. "Yesterday, my teenage son told me he helped someone change a tire. He said he wasn't afraid to stop because he knew things were changing." Sarah nodded. My first graders now play helping people at recess instead of just playing tag. They pretend to help stuck cars, and they make sure everyone gets treated fairly. As they boarded their plane, Marcus received one more piece of good news. Officer Chen had texted him, the young officer who had apologized. He was now leading the new training program at the police academy, teaching future officers how to better serve their community. The plane took off into the sunset, carrying them back home. Both Marcus and Sarah knew that their work wasn't finished. It was really just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to speak up, and new chances to make a difference. But for now, they were content knowing that a simple flat tire on a dark highway had led to real change. Sometimes the biggest movements start with the smallest moments of kindness. 1 year had passed since that fateful night on Highway 27. Marcus and Sarah sat together in the community center's main hall, surrounded by hundreds of people celebrating the first anniversary of their Highway Heroes program. The walls were decorated with photos showing how their story had changed lives across the country. Marcus, now the program director of Safe Stop at City Hospital, looked different from the tired cleaner he had been a year ago. He still worked his regular job, but now he also trained volunteers who helped stranded motorists. His kind smile remained the same, but he carried himself with new confidence. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Sarah asked, looking around the crowded room. She had been named Teacher of the Year for creating a curriculum about community awareness and bias prevention. Her students still called her their hero teacher. Officer Martinez, who had been promoted to police training director, walked up to their table. "You two started something amazing," she said. "Last month, we trained our 1,000th officer under the Thompson-Miller Protocol. Complaints about racial profiling have dropped by 60%. The celebration was being filmed by a documentary crew. They had spent the past year following the ripple effects of Marcus and Sarah's story. On a large screen, they showed clips of changes that had happened across the country. There was footage of auto repair shops teaching free classes in different cities. Videos showed police officers and community members working together at neighborhood events. School children learned about judging people by their actions, not their appearance. Marcus's wife Tamara stood up to speak. "A year ago, my husband stopped to help someone with a flat tire," she said, her voice strong with emotion. "He didn't know he would start a movement. He just did what was right." Sarah's turn to speak came next. She held up her phone, showing the video that had started it all. "This video has been viewed 20 million times," she said. "But the real change isn't in the views. It's in the actions it inspired." The biggest surprise of the evening came when Officer Chen walked to the stage with his teenage son. The young man had started a youth program called Next Generation Heroes, teaching other teens about car maintenance and community service. "My dad and Mr. Thompson showed me that change is possible," the teenager said. "Now we have chapters in 50 schools across the country." Jim from the auto shop stood up next. His Highway Heroes program had grown into a national network. "We've helped over 10,000 people learn basic car repair," he announced proudly. "But more importantly, we've helped build bridges between communities." As the evening continued, Marcus and Sarah watched a group of children perform a play based on their story. The kids had changed the ending to show what should have happened that night. Police officers approaching calmly, asking questions first, and thanking the helper instead of drawing weapons. Near the end of the celebration, the mayor presented Marcus and Sarah with the city's highest civilian honor. But what made Marcus most proud was seeing his son in the audience, wearing a Highway Heroes volunteer shirt. The young man no longer had to fear helping others like his father once did. Sarah's students had made a special presentation too. They had written letters to future students, telling them about what they learned from their teacher's courage. The letters would be sealed in a time capsule to be opened in 10 years. As the event came to a close, Marcus and Sarah stood together for one last photo. Behind them was a new billboard that would be displayed across the country. It showed two hands of different colors clasped together, with the words "Help has no color" written below. "You know what's amazing?" Marcus said quietly to Sarah. "That night, I almost drove past you. I almost let fear stop me from helping." Sarah smiled. "And I almost let fear stop me from trusting you. Look what would have been lost if either of us had given in to fear." As they walked out of the community center that night, they passed several cars in the parking lot with Highway Heroes bumper stickers. The program's motto was printed on each one: Kindness first, questions later. Their story had shown that change was possible, one person at a time, one action at a time. It proved that sometimes the greatest movements start with the simplest choices, like stopping to help someone with a flat tire on a dark highway. 5 years had passed since the night that changed everything. Marcus Thompson sat in his new office at the National Highway Safety Foundation, looking at the many awards and photos on his walls. He had come a long way from being a hospital cleaner. Now he was the executive director of community relations, overseeing Highway Heroes programs in all 50 states. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Miller. She was now the principal of Unity Elementary School, where she had created one of the country's most successful youth education programs about bias and community service. The message contained a link to some exciting news. Marcus, we did it. Her message read, Congress just passed the Safe Highway Helper Law. The new law, also known as the Thompson-Miller Act, made it illegal for anyone to be harassed or detained while helping others on highways if they weren't doing anything wrong. It also provided funding for community-based roadside assistance programs across the country. Marcus smiled as he remembered their journey to this moment. They had testified before Congress 3 times, sharing their story and the stories of thousands of others who had faced similar situations. The law had taken 2 years to pass, but it was worth every minute of work. Later that day, Marcus drove to a special ceremony at the police academy. Officer Chen, now Chief Chen, had invited him to speak to the graduating class. As Marcus walked into the building, he saw the familiar Thompson-Miller Protocol poster on the wall, showing the proper ways for police to approach roadside situations. Can you believe it? Chief Chen said, greeting Marcus with a warm handshake. We trained over 50,000 officers nationwide. Incidents of roadside profiling have dropped by 85% in the last 5 years. The graduation ceremony was being broadcast live on national television. In the audience, Marcus could see his wife Tamara sitting with their son, who was now in police academy training himself. Next to them sat Sarah with her family, and even Officer Martinez, who would become the state's first female police commissioner. When Marcus stood to speak, he held up his old hospital cleaning badge. 5 years ago, I was just a man trying to help someone change a tire. He began. I never imagined that simple act would lead to national change. But that's how progress works. One person, one moment, one choice at a time. After the ceremony, Marcus and Sarah visited the National Civil Rights Museum, where a permanent exhibit told their story. The actual tire from Sarah's car that night was on display, along with the original viral video playing on a loop. School children gathered around the exhibit, learning about how a simple act of kindness had helped change the nation. Ms. Miller, Mr. Thompson, a young voice called out. They turned to see Tommy Chen, Chief Chen's son, now a college student. He was leading a group of high school students on a museum tour. I was just telling them about how your story inspired me to start Next Generation Heroes. We now have chapters in every state. That evening, Marcus and Sarah attended a special dinner celebrating the passing of the new law. The restaurant was the same one where Sarah's car had broken down 5 years ago. The owner had turned that section of the highway into a memorial park called Unity Point, with benches and emergency phones for anyone needing help. During dinner, they watched a new public service announcement that would air nationwide. It showed people of all races and backgrounds helping each other on highways, with the message, America's roads connect more than just cities, they connect hearts. Sarah showed Marcus some letters from her former students, now in high school. Many wrote about how learning about bias and kindness in first grade had shaped their lives. One student had even written her college application essay about the impact of the Highway Heroes story. As they finished their meal, Marcus received one more piece of good news. The United Nations had invited them to share their story and program internationally. Countries around the world wanted to implement similar changes in their communities. You know what still amazes me, Sarah said, looking out the restaurant window toward Unity Point. All of this happened because you chose to stop that night, and I chose to speak up. Marcus nodded, and look how many people are making those same choices now, every single day. Outside, cars drove past Unity Point, many displaying the now familiar Highway Heroes emblem. The movement they had started had grown beyond their wildest dreams, proving that the smallest act of kindness could create waves of change that would ripple through generations to come.